all asking.
Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah. It's, we should have been, June was nasty last night, we should have been too, I suppose. We're gonna get it, I guess. Sounds like somebody's playing drum. Yeah. Sounded pretty cute when they were singing out there. Welcome back home.
Yeah.
I hear you were on a little tour, little trip.
Little trip, not tour. Well, yeah, I guess we toured.
Did you get to hold all the little babies?
Yeah, oh yeah. Definitely.
Oh, good.
Play with a dump truck and then I played with my brother, so you know, he's like 2 anyway, so
Nice to be intergenerational.
yeah.
I'm sorry, there's one I think in your
Hi.
How are you?
Come back to this, I don't know.
Should have stayed in Chicago.
Should've stayed.
Windy city of Chicago is probably windier here, huh?
It was at times. My brother doesn't understand blocks at all, and he said, "Oh, it's just a couple of blocks," and it ends up being 8.
Oh,
So you know, we don't totally believe him.
That's 2 country blocks, I guess.
Yeah, but he's not from the country. He's a city mouse. I'm a country mouse. So, got nothing to do with that. Yeah.
all by your lonesome today.
Rebecca's coming.
Oh,
Rebecca's coming, so. Yes.
So what's happened since I'm gone?
Well, we're the last 2 standing. So
Lovely.
that's how that goes.
Okay.
Leah is in California at a conference, which is lovely.
Yeah.
She's escaped.
Good on her.
The good vicar has COVID.
Did she come
hence
home with it?
This? Well, she tested positive on Wednesday.
Oh.
Yesterday. She tested positive yesterday.
Okay.
And she wasn't feeling ill at all prior to yesterday morning when she woke up. So,
Yeah.
seems, I mean, she'd have been home for a week at that point, but who knows? So,
Yeah.
and Pastor Jules is feeling crummy as well, so we'll see.
Well, is there church on Sunday?
I feel great. So, so far so good. But
how's your sermon coming?
yeah, that's fun. That's new. So that's, yes, because Erica was supposed to preach this week. So we're flying by the seat of our pants here.
Did she share her outline with you?
No, but I wouldn't have asked her to because
Okay.
we are vastly different preachers. That would be like asking Jules and I to try to preach one of our sermons. We're vastly different preachers. So, I think that she would hate preaching one of my sermons as much as I would not enjoy preaching one of hers. So,
So how well did you pass your extemporary speaking classes?
I was decent,
That was, okay.
you know.
Then we don't have to worry.
Hi.
Which kind of chair? I was going to ask you. I did this
This one's
intentionally.
perfectly fine.
I
It's
wasn't
those
sure.
rolling chairs.
Okay.
Because I, twice now, have very nearly rolled out of them. Uncomfortably so.
No, you know, it's always an adventure.
Yes, much too much of an adventure with a rolling chair. So. Cool.
You and I are going to have conversations when we're
Hi, how are you?
Welcome.
We did not have to. We did have a COVID exposure on the staff on Tuesday, and so we are masking for that benefit. So just so you know, if you'd like to, there are masks out here on the table. You're more than welcome to wear one. If you'd rather not, it's totally up to you. Just wanted to give you a heads up.
Sandy, catch me afterwards if you would. I have something I want to pass along to you.
I didn't hear the first part.
Catch me after this if you
Catch
would.
you.
Something I want to pass
All
along.
right.
Thank you. Hello. Yes,
Hello,
enjoy.
hello.
Welcome.
And I got cross earrings.
Get brisk in this place, I feel like.
Oh, it is that.
Yes,
You know,
he
the
just
thing about
retired
that,
from
they
the
have it for.
They do keep going. They do. They are not so great for my ears, but
I hadn't
they.
even thought of that. I don't wear one of
They
them.
do keep.
Decide who the man's voice was last week.
Since I came to Minnesota.
So when we're listening, and I thought.
Yeah, no, I loved that during COVID. That was the best part of it. I was always warm when I was outside, so.
Okay.
Somebody had on the
Got a
staff.
collection.
Oh, I do. Yeah, still around, isn't it? Still haunting us.
It's even cold in here.
It's 70 degrees in here. I just checked
I think
it.
so.
70?
Yes, it's 70. It's just that the door has been open,
So I'm
so.
bringing in cold from
That's
outside.
just how
for
that
some
is.
It
reason,
is
I think.
cold out there,
It is.
wind is.
Yeah.
I need to crank up the boiler heat in that in the entryway.
Ah,
So
Was that a yes or a no?
let's see. All right. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Good to see you all this morning. Hello to all of you folks joining us at home today. It's cold out, so maybe you made the better decision. I don't know. We are excited to jump into these texts for where are we at? The fifth Sunday after the Epiphany?
Something like
Fifth
that.
Sunday after the Epiphany, yes. We are in week, so last Sunday, at least for the Gospels, as we've been walking through Matthew, last Sunday, in lieu of doing the Beatitudes, Pastor Jules switched it to the call of Paul. So technically, though, in the calendar year, we are in week 2, though, of Jesus's big old sermon, starting with Beatitudes and then moving on. And we'll do it for 3 more weeks after this as well. So there's plenty of time to catch up with everything that he has to say. We are also looking at the Isaiah text today, much to the chagrin of my dear colleagues. And that should be a real hoot and a half here as we go through. Prayers out there in the world for Pastor Jules and Vicar Erica as you recover from all the wonderful things that are going around right now. I hope you're feeling better. And we really, really hope that you're here on Sunday. It'd be great if you were here on Sunday. There's a lot going on. Speaking of, this Sunday we have 2 baptisms. We are welcoming new members, of which there are
Lots of us.
several, right?
Yes.
Yeah, many and various. We are celebrating First Communion, which there are probably this week there are going to be 4 or 5 of them that will be here. And I'm looking at you, Joan, noting that I've never got you the names, and I apologize for that. They'll come. It'll be great. And then we also have our annual meeting. So it's going to be a great week. So join us for all of those wonderful things, and come and be a part of it. It'd be great to have you here. We're going to kick off though with Isaiah.
Which is mostly wonderful
Yeah.
until we get to chapter 58.
At which point in time I would argue that it remains wonderful, but I would be in the minority in that, I think. So it's going to be good. You'll notice if you're looking on your fancy, colorful pieces of paper, though, that I believe that it officially ends at verse 9a in that. We are, though, taking it to verse 12.
Actually, verse 14.
You're going to verse 14.
I'm going because the beginning and the end match.
We just keep going.
We kept trying.
That's fine.
Hey, I was looking for something I could celebrate.
That sounds great. I'm a big fan. So we're gonna kick right into Isaiah today.
Do you know how in some of the old cop things, there's the good cop, the bad cop? Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I love coming to this Bible study is the enthusiasm of my colleagues, the insights that you folks add, and we put all of that together and it's delightful. I'm the non-enthusiastic bad cop. I don't like chapter 58. I don't like it at all. I told Tanner that the more I would read into it, I would find something that I would really enjoy. I have not. Tanner's reaction is incredibly different, which I think is wonderful, in that's how some of us understand and how we read things. And I was really excited when we talked and we both saw that the passage ends on verse 12. But because I sort of do this, I kept reading and I went, no, it doesn't. The Hebrew ends on verse 14. I know why it wasn't included, simply because it talks about honoring the Sabbath, which we don't pay much attention to today. Nonetheless, the first verse 1 matches the last verse 14. They answer one another. And I went to the Hebrew text, and that's where it stops in the Hebrew text as well. And it makes a lot of sense, and I'll talk about it. But I'm Gloria gloomy today. I need some uplift from you folks. And I would like to read through verse 14, because 1 and 14 answer each other. And if you have enthusiastic and wonderful things to say, I will be delighted, because I don't. I mean, the more I study it, the more frustrated I get with it. And I'll explain why, and look to you and to you for some enthusiastic responses here. But I would like to read, I don't want to, yes, let's read Isaiah 58, and starting with verse 1 and going to verse 14. And note as you're reading or hearing them how the first verse echoes, or the last verse answers the first verse. So Joan, would you lead us?
Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sins.
Yet they seek me daily, and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinance of justice. They take delight in approaching to God.
We have fasted before you, they say. Why aren't you impressed? We have been very hard on ourselves, and you don't even notice it. I will tell you why I respond. It's because you are fasting to please yourselves. Even while you fast, you keep oppressing your workers.
Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush, and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord?
Did we skip 4?
Six.
Is not this the fast that I chose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke?
Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke?
Is it not to share your food with the hungry, and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe him, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood?
Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard.
Sorry. No. I there we go. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and the Lord will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil.
If you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like noonday.
The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters never fail.
And they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in.
Keep the Sabbath day holy. Don't pursue your own interests on that day, but enjoy the Sabbath, and speak of it with delight as the Lord's holy day. Honor the Sabbath and everything you do on that day, and don't follow your own desires or talk idly.
Then you shall take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
Beautiful, thank you. Though you've seen it, if I can bring out verse 1 and verse 14. Verse 1, shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of the Lord their sins. This is directed to, it's in the masculine singular, which may not mean much, but the masculine singular in Hebrew is completely inclusive. If there's a single feminine part, everything becomes feminine. Masculine singular incorporates bunches of people, one people, male people, female people. Masculine in Hebrew is inclusive. Too often through the centuries read the wrong way. I mean, if he goes to the store, it could be me. So it just, that's verse 1. Verse 14, then you, again singular, take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob. For, masculine singular, the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Do this, then I will do this. And that's what bugs me. Now, within this text, there are many beautiful things. And, you've met me. I'm happier when I can put the text in a context. If I can say, yeah, they're seeing the shadow of the Assyrians out there in the background, first part of Isaiah, or the Assyrians have completely devastated the land. They have nothing. They can't even farm properly after the exile in the around 586, so in the 5th century there. It's either 8th century, 6th century, sorry. I can't do that. There are no historical boundaries here. And the more I read this text, the more it sounds like it's written for us today. You go out there and pretend, and nothing's going to work for you. But I'm going to try real hard to avoid politics. But the politics comes all over the place. And I'm an older pastor. I grew up in the days of the dread works righteousness. Do this, and things will be good. I went to seminary in the elder days. It's no longer the issue. We don't hear about it much. But in my very first parish, right on the edge of Camden, New Jersey, where we had extremely wealthy people and tenements and about as poor as you can get. I remember vividly one day when I went to a certain doctor's house, a marvelous man, dying of cancer of the spine. It was horrific. Beautiful man. Went into the neighborhoods, visited people with his wife, all that glorious stuff. And as I walked in, though walking was hard for him, he had a cup of tea for me, and I walked across a real Persian carpet, and on the wall there was a hand-drawn picture by Degas of a hand. And it really was an original. That's the kind of place we had. 5 blocks later, I walked into the tenement to help Mary, because Mary's life was really hard. And I brought milk and I brought diapers like I usually do, because I know she needed it. She had 4 children at that time, and a husband who tried but really couldn't work. Life was really hard. So our church helped this couple keep going. And I know she was busy with 2 of the children, 2 of whom they had significant difficulties. And I was in the kitchen with the little one who was crawling, and she crawled over to a little bowl on the floor. They had no animals that I can remember. And a mouse was drinking out of the milk, and the child was trying to drink the milk. That was a differentiation, 5 blocks. One day Mary walked into my office. We tried to keep her supplied with what we could. I can remember 4 children. I can remember First Communion with the first child who was the most physically, mentally problematic. We couldn't sit still ever, so we did First Communion classes, walking around the sanctuary, walking outside, walking in with 4 others. We never stopped moving because we couldn't reach this youngster if we did. I thought we built up some kind of relationship. The whole congregation was kind of involved in trying to help Mary and her husband. One day she marched into my office and she said, "Done." I said, "Mary?" She said, "I read the Bible. I prayed to God. I asked for my husband to get a decent job. He didn't. I read the Bible. I prayed to God. I asked for some money to feed my children. It didn't happen. I read the Bible. She was entirely swallowed up with works righteousness. And she walked out of my office and we never saw her again. And I was unable to bring or help. So works righteousness, and coming from that era in the Lutheran Church when we paid a lot of attention to it, kind of slapped me in the face in my first parish. And I came to All Saints, and I empathize, understand the problem with if-then. If you do this, then that will happen, which kind of walks on the edge of some of the stuff I knew. And I dislike a whole bunch. And as I read through Isaiah 58, if, then, all the way through this. So when I did a brief reviewing of the thing, it was hard, but it got harder for me the more I read this. Now, that's not to cancel the whole passage. You will have been out in society and you know full well what happens when somebody like me gets a hold of a text and you hang on to one line and you throw it in people's faces, and I apologize because I'm doing it too. But I've been prey to this too. I've lived through some very awful parts of life. And I prayed to God, and it didn't happen. And I hoped and I did everything I knew how to do good, and it didn't work. So, though I'm not Mary, I respect some of her pain and confusion. And her life was awful. And she really did give everything she had to trying to raise those children. And Tanner knows I've invited back to a church I served in Chicago where they opened up their church to the homeless. They became a homeless shelter. They gave all the offices and parish hall away. That was downstairs. Kept one room for an office. Then on the next level they had the sanctuary. It was the worst building I've ever served in, but they gave up just about everything for the homeless. And things have gone astonishingly well. Miracles have happened in the 20 plus years since I was there. So I get to go back and celebrate with them. The last night when I was here, one of the gentlemen from Connect Center was here to be able to open the doors for the cold weather shelter. And he stood back and he talked about us. And he said how amazing it was and how wonderful it is that we could, without hesitation, open our congregation to those folks in need. And I said, yeah, that's why I'm here. I hadn't really realized it. I knew I was comfortable here. I loved being here. But he gave it words. Because we put into action what theoretically we're reading about here. And some of these words are excellent. And some echo first Isaiah. You know, free the widow, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. That's what we're doing. And some of these words echo the second half of Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to bring the good news, to bind up the brokenhearted. We're living some of that here today. And I thank God for that. I still don't like this passage. I do like one of the Hebrew commentators who said, the passage is about the futility of prayer and fasting without amendment, the supreme importance of moral and religious conduct. Yeah, I think so. Or problematic prayer. That still doesn't save it for me. I think it defines it. But there are hopeful things. Verses 6 and 7, do read those again. It's really interesting how verse 1 echoes verse 4. I'm sorry, guys. I still don't like this passage. But it's been used, Tanner told me, for the National Day of Prayer. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to say problematic prayer or the way not to pray, that makes sense. But I did warn you that I wasn't terribly excited about Isaiah 58.
You did.
Folks, can you resolve Isaiah 58 for me? Other than to say we have problematic
Not through all
passages?
those years, no.
I agree that works righteousness can be read out of this text. I would argue
Good.
that we shouldn't.
Okay.
I think that works righteousness is a terrible theology, and we have pulled it out of the Bible over and over and over again, and we never should have. And so I would encourage us to stop reading it back into it. That
Okay.
would be my argument. And I know that is just embedded historical reality at this
Yes.
point for not just you, but for our churches and our theology, and it is baked into, especially Lutheranism,
Yes.
the kickback against the idea of works righteousness being our, Martin Luther selves. And I get that, and I think that that's important. I think that it's also important that the pendulum doesn't shift the other way, so that we get to what was defined in the early 2000s as moralistic therapeutic deism, this idea that if you're good, you're all set, basically, right? Like, just be a decent person and that's fine, and that takes care of it all, right? Like, the reality is that the Bible has requirements for God's people. Like, the scriptures are very clear that if you are one of God's people and you claim to be a disciple of Christ, then there is a reality that you accept to live your life by, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't see that as a rule that must be followed, but as a way of life that we cannot help but enact, right? When we look at the third article of the Creed, we think about it, right? This is where I come back to. I brought it out. I believe that by my own understanding or strength, I cannot believe in Jesus Christ, my Lord, or come to him, but instead the Holy Spirit has called me through the gospel, enlightened me through his gifts, and made me holy and kept me in the true faith, just as he calls, gathers, enlightens, and makes holy the whole Christian church here on earth, and keeps it with Christ Jesus in the one common true faith. It's not us. It is God who brings us along the way, right? And that sets aside the entire concept of works righteousness. It pushes it away because it's not us doing the work to get to the reward. It is us doing the work because God has already brought us into the reward, and the work is not so much work as it is just who we are as God's people. This is what we do, right? The talk talks, my walk talks, my walk talks louder, right? This is, we show up, we do good, we be kind, not because it's a task that we must perform, but because walking the walk of faith is literally just what you do as a person of faith, and that is just who you are, not an extra thing.
And too often, the part that I find so problematic gets blown up in today's politics, and this ends with, I will give you the heritage of Jacob, which puts the finger on the Hebrew people, which wasn't the intention of the text at all. But I see some of that, and it troubles me. So I'm really glad to get to talk through some of this with you, because the more I delved into it, the more lost I got. Alice down the rabbit hole. I just,
Yeah. I also think this text is based, it's speaking directly to the reality that putting on a show, talking the talk of faith,
yes.
is not walking the walk of faith, right? Like, performative religion is not faith.
Thank you.
Right? Like, that's what's
I agree.
being spoken against you, right? So look, you serve your own interest on the fast day and oppress all you were. Like, no, right? Like, if you're going to claim to be a person of faith, then God, the prophet, is saying, then you have to live as such, right? Like, is this not the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke? This is a reminder of the Jubilee, right? Like, which never happened, right? We have this huge, beautiful law about the Jubilee year and the concept of letting people be free and the return of the land, and injustices that have built up over 50 years crashing down, and this Sabbath of land and people and rest and joy and forgiveness and just a coming together happening, right? And the giving back. And it never happened. And here God through the prophet is saying, but why? Right? How can you claim to be my people and yet not do the things that make my people my people? that's what I see here. And so when we get to, and I will not deny that there's the then, right? Then the light, then you shall call, then, I get that. If you offer your food to the hungry, then your light shall shine in the darkness. I don't see that as you have to do this and then I'll be nice to you. I see it as if you just let yourself be my people, let yourself walk the walk and live this life of faith, which you claim is yours already, if you just do it. Just stop being performative and just do it. Don't just throw a pride flag out in front of your church and call yourself welcoming, but actually, welcome people. Then your light will shine. Not I'm going to make it shine and I'm going to reward you, but the reality is that if you actually do this, you will be a light to the nations. And wouldn't that be really cool? I would really like that, says the Lord.
Says, absolutely. Uttereth the mouth of the Lord.
Right? Verily, verily. So that's the joy that I get from this text, is that I see it as a reminder of the core of who we are called to be. Not commanded to be, but called to be. And that if we live out these calls that we have already claimed we are doing, but we actually do it, then truly wonderful things will happen, not just for us, but for the world. Like this is not, I want you to be happy. It is, by doing these things, you will actually create difference in the world, and there will be joy and forgiveness and mercy and happiness for others, which is the call of the people of God, is to be a light to the nations, not a light to themselves.
Thank you. Now, you stand up and preach that to some of the folks that read this very differently.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
That's what I did
Cool.
at the National
Not
Day of
you
Prayer
guys.
Breakfast. It didn't go well. I got yelled at.
Oh, dear.
It was fun, though.
Really? I don't much like being yelled at, but I have been as well.
No. It's like being yelled at by, it's like when the immigration task force got yelled at by the sheriff's department because we decided that we didn't like, that they were oppressing detainees.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's worth getting yelled at about.
Gosh, yes.
There's a certain amount of joy in that. Just like, oh,
And
that's fun.
This
You
homeless
can't see my
shelter-
face, but I'm smiling.
Yes. This homeless shelter, 5 churches agreed to house the homeless. They chose the smallest, the most rotten building, and they did it.
Mm-hmm.
Young people held it, and now 20 years later, they've somehow teamed up with a nonprofit who's going to raise that terrible building, worst I've ever served in. And they're going to build 37 handicap accessible, low income housing, also create a space for the church in some of the most expensive property in Chicago. How that happened defeats me, but it's happened. And that can only be God.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
they were faithful through those years. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
happily done.
But they were faithful.
They were faithful in a way I can understand, and you preach so and live so well.
If they were faithful, then the light of God shines.
We stood up to some very powerful groups when I
Yeah.
was there, and they continued to do it.
Yeah, which is a wonderful thing, right?
Oh, yes.
That's. I mean, I don't love if-then language, but at the same time, like, sometimes if-then language is all that we have in English. Like, it's just a reality that this is what it is, and sometimes it's, if God's people show up, then the world is better, and that's a good thing, All right, let's look at Matthew chapter 5, which
Thank you.
I would argue is just a direct continuation of what we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
So we'll just keep going. It's going to be great. Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 20 is where we are resting today, and I would like to read that for us today. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. The city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
What? Do you hate this text too?
Well, I'm glad that you're reaching on it. The way I solve these is to go on, to include a few more things.
Yes, I
That works
know.
for me.
But I think there's enough here. I think there's good. It's good enough. There's
It's
already
yours.
two
It's
separate
yours.
chapters or two separate paragraphs.
Oh gosh, yes.
All right, what do we think? Ooh, I almost fell out of this chair. It's gonna be fine. Everything's fine. What do we think?
Wheels.
What do you see?
I'm glad
I
you're preaching.
think the last verse where he cites the scribes and Pharisees,
Yeah.
that is speaking to the people of his time as here are the examples that are held up. And you can relate to the comparison.
Yeah. Absolutely. I talked about that last verse at North Square last night, because that's what I got stuck on too. And this idea of righteousness, right? Being who God created you to be, doing what God created you to do. And Jesus, for all the times throughout the Gospels where Jesus argues with the scribes and Pharisees and they get a bad rap, right? This is a moment where Jesus is saying, here are people who are living out the Torah.
Yes.
Right? These are people who are, to the best of their abilities, living Torah, and maybe they're not always perfect at it. But if you think that you're doing it better than people who dedicated their lives to it in this specific way, maybe you should really step back and examine yourself a little bit, right? So this is one of those moments where they really are lifted up as like, hey, here are people who know what's going on and know what God has to say. So let's lift that up and think about what it means to be who God created you to be and do what God created you to do.
They've memorized the Old Testament. They sing it. They've given up proper work to go around and beg to teach the Word of God to the people of God. These are phenomenal people in many ways.
Absolutely. What else do we see? What else? Or is that what you were kind of thinking about, Joan, or what were you?
No,
Were you just pulling that from it? That stuck out. Other pieces of this that.
Because he criticizes them in almost every other place.
And almost every other place, but here,
Yes.
good for them.
Yes.
Good on them, right? Anything else that you see, that you like, that you don't like, that you noticed?
So in verse 19, when he says, whoever breaks one of these commandments and teaches others to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just break the commandment, are you okay?
I think that if you're least in the kingdom of heaven, if you break it and teach others to do the same, and if you keep the commandments and teach others to be called the same, and that makes you great, then if you just break them but don't teach other people, that must put you somewhere in the middle. That's my assumption. If there's some sort of level, which I don't really understand there to be, but there you go. That's I noticed that today for the very first time as I was reading it, and I was like, huh. Well, you know what else I noticed? It doesn't say that if you break the commandments and teach others to be the same, you're not welcome in the kingdom of heaven.
Yes.
Thank you. And there's something about
Which is
teaching
interesting
that's really
about that.
powerful.
There is something about teaching that's really powerful. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'm going to go with verse 19 on Sunday because that seems, somewhat challenging. But
And also
let that be.
categorizing, which gets,
Let that be. Yeah. Categorizing is never fun. You don't need to categorize.
That kind of reminds me when I was growing up and saying something that was inappropriate. My mother said, that was something you should not have said. And I said, what difference does it make? Because I'm thinking it anyway. And her comment was, now you have to ask for forgiveness twice. Once for saying it and once for thinking it.
Yeah. Which is entirely Jesus accurate, right? Like if what was it? You have heard it said, "Thou shalt not kill."
Yes.
But but I say to you, if you wish bad things upon another person, you have killed them in your heart, right? Like, and that he equates our hatred of other people, our anger at other people, with murder of other people, and Jesus lays them on the same level, right?
That's verse 21.
Yeah. That's coming. It's
Yes,
coming,
that's
right?
coming.
I was going to say, it's got to be coming here pretty quick. That'll be fun. Jules will get that. That'll be great.
Wow.
That's good. Good for her.
Excellent.
That'll be good. Oh, no, I think I'm preaching next week, too. Oh, never mind.
Well, a continuation.
We'll come back around. It'll be great. Yeah, that'll sound familiar. I love, and hadn't noticed this before, you are the salt of the earth and you are the light of the world. That there are no preconditions. Which is one of the things that I think connects this beautifully to what I like about Isaiah 58, in the sense of Jesus is saying, you already are this.
Ah.
You already are the salt of the earth. You already are the lights of the world. No preconditions, no extra steps, no anything else. Already, now, you are these things. So just act like it. Right? And basically what I read here is Jesus saying, this is who you are. The only thing that you can do is mess up from here and lose your saltiness, right? So avoid that, right? I mean, but the call is just keep living this out, because you already are this. Whoever you are, wherever you have met Christ when you wake up in the morning, you are this day the salt of the earth and the light of the world. So just keep that. Just do that. It might be a really terrible day for you, right? It might just be a super sucky day. But you're still the salt of the earth and the light of the world when you wake up that morning and you encounter Christ, right? So just recognize that and keep it up, Because even on our worst days, we can still affect good in the world. Even on our worst days, we can still be light to the nations. Even on our worst days, we can still be salty folks who give God's flavor to the world around us. Which actually I have a story about, which I think you'll like. Okay, let's talk about salt for a second. You have heard me talk about Richard Swanson. He's a professor at Augsburg, I think, still, of New Testament, and he's one of my favorite commentators. I just jive with him. It's really fun. And he wrote about this metaphor of being salt and how it has an older history. And I'm just going to read it to you because I think that it's interesting. Okay? The earliest place that I have seen being salt is in reference to the Jews who were forced into exile by the Assyrians in 722 BCE, which we talked about very recently. Those Jews were scattered throughout the vast Assyrian Empire, and they never returned. They were lost to history and are remembered by Jews as being scattered throughout the world, living incognito, unknown, finally, even to themselves. Right? So people who were taken and then just embedded in a culture, and generations later, the descendants of those Jews who were lost didn't even know that they had this history. Yeah? Jewish faith understands these hidden Jews to have remembered, even without knowing it, the basic moral practices of Torah. And as such, they are a preserving force in the world. So when Jesus addresses his audience as the salt of the earth, he is reminding them that Torah observance is not just a religious thing, not just an odd set of Jewish practices involving seafood and pork and other kinds that many non-Jews have trouble with. Torah observance is good for the world. It makes communities gentler and more orderly. It makes human beings kinder and more tolerant. I think that that's like a lovely idea of the saltiness thing, right? Like, and that would have spoken to a tradition. I mean, this is 700 years later, right? That would have spoken to an idea and a tradition that could have been known even to the people that Jesus was speaking to at this time, right? This idea that even just the memory, the embedded memory of God changes the world.
That is intriguing.
Right? I
Yeah,
think that's
sounds
and,
fun.
and for those, I know many of you have done visits over the years, and you've been a part of some of our outreach ministries. Some of you have had the privilege of sitting bedside with people who are dying, who do not remember their own name, let alone the names of their families, but remember the Lord's Prayer.
Yes.
Or remember Jesus loves me. Right? Like, there are salty bits of God that get embedded in us, that change us, and that we cannot help but live into the world around us. Because they're so much a part of who we are, because God has claimed us and gets stuck inside of us, and then we cannot help but live that out. Which is why I think that even on our worst days, we cannot help but live the gospel into the world. Even when we don't know it, even when we're not actively doing it, even when to us it might seem like there's no way possible that we are being a light to the world, we cannot help but do it because God is so stuck inside of us. Like, I think that's a really cool imagery of the salt, right? And of the light. I mean, that idea, when Jesus says, no one after lighting a lamp puts it under a bushel basket, but on the lampstand, right? That he's not saying it's an option to put a basket over it and light the basket on fire, right? He's saying that it's inconceivable that you would light a candle and then hide the candle. It's inconceivable. In the same way, it is inconceivable that we can pass the light of Christ to these two kids that are being baptized on Sunday, and then that they will immediately put it out, and it will never, ever, ever shine into the world. Even if those two kids that come to church on Sunday and get baptized never once set foot in a church again, which we know, statistically, is possible.
Can happen.
Right? Some of us have experienced that in our own families, right? Even if they never set foot in church again, even if they never utter the name of God again, the light of God is embedded in them by the prayers that we bring, by the word of God that is enacted in that moment, right? Not by our actions, but by God's actions in that moment of naming and claiming. They are in. They are part of it, right? Not because there are people who are in and who are out, but because God has claimed them, and we have witnessed that in a very specific way that we understand to be important. And because of that, that light will never leave them. And I have, many of you have, encountered people who have had experiences of faith later on in life and have no idea why, right? I mean, we have a young lady who's sitting with us in church the last 2 weeks who has had no experience of church in the past, who does not believe in God, but walked in here out of the blue one day and found community, which is what she was looking for, and is experiencing and sharing the light of Christ, even though she claims to not believe in it in any way, shape, or form. Right? That is not us. That is God. Mm-hmm. And I think that connects Matthew to Isaiah. I think it connects our scriptures back and forth throughout the history of the scriptures, throughout the history of God's people, in saying that this is the reason I like Isaiah, right?
Well,
because
I mostly like Isaiah.
It's the reason that I like Isaiah 58, 1 through 12. Because it's saying you have the light in you. It is there. Don't hide it because you can't.
May I add to your salt imagery?
Sure.
I come from the Bay Area, California, and long after I left, my parents stayed there. So I would fly into the Bay Area. They got very sick in there till we got them back to Minnesota. But as the airplane would swoop down over the bay, you would see these odd-shaped, not always squares, rectangles, funny-shaped things, the salt flats. Different layers of flats, they would gather the seawater in and it would evaporate. And as it evaporated at the different times, the flats would change color. Depending on what the land was they needed to do, they were different shapes. And I always love the salt image of multiplicity of colors and shapes. So when I read this part, I think of the salt flats of the San Francisco Bay, because about as diverse as you can get, as are we. And that for me was always a great joy, was to fly in over the salt flats. And I didn't connect it with Isaiah 58.
You could though.
Oh, I
It'd
see.
be good for you if you did.
I connected it with Matthew.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll connect it with Isaiah
Okay.
58. You can connect it to Matthew. Other thoughts on this or Isaiah or other texts that we have?
Isaiah is a really good book to read, all of it. It's really good.
Matthew is too.
Yes,
You know, it's
well,
good time. It's good fun. All right. Well, thanks all.
I'm so glad you're preaching.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I'm preaching on yet. It's fun
Ah.
to do Bible study on this. It's different to do preaching on it. So we can't, if I preach for an hour, our annual meeting will be late. So it's going to be late as it is because there's a lot.
I was gonna
If I
say, there's so
mention,
much
there's a
going on.
lot going on Sunday. It's going to be
Right.
great. Other than what's coming up this weekend, also, a reminder that it's Juice Sunday this Sunday. And then the following Sunday, the 12th, Vicki, the executive director of Basic Needs, is going to be here, and she is going to speak after worship. And we're also doing a food drive for Basic Needs that Sunday. They are specifically looking for fast meals. So things that are easily microwavable, things you can pop the top off a can. I mean, quick stuff. And think all ages, because there are just the work that Basic Needs. This is separate from the homeless outreach that we're doing right now. It includes it, but in addition to that, there are a lot of families struggling right now, and we have a lot of grandparents who are coming and getting food to feed their grandkids, sort of thing too. And so, like, this is spanning a whole bunch of ages when you're thinking about this. So Lunchables are great, and SpaghettiOs are great, and I mean, you know, like mac and cheese is great. I mean, you know, all the things. So that'll be on the 12th. Of course, you can bring food by the church anytime that you want, and we will make sure that it gets into somebody's hands, because that is always a possibility. So, do you have any announcements?
No, but as long as the first and the second Sundays of this month are so crowded, what about the third? Anything forward to that? Yeah, I don't either.
I mean, I can look at it. I don't remember what's happening. Does anybody remember what's happening on the third Sunday in February? I don't know.
12th, 19th.
Oh, that's the Transfiguration.
And
Nothing
what
else.
after service?
Nothing that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Then I will hope to meet with the holistic pastoral here
On the 19th.
on the 19th.
Wonderful. And then, just so you all know, on the 26th, Vicar Erica is going to do a presentation on Tanzania after worship. So that's all. Some of that stuff's in the newsletter. Take a look at that if you haven't yet. Happy Puxatani Phil Day.
Is that today?
That's today,
Oh,
right?
wow.
It's today. He
Okay.
saw his shadow this morning.
Oh, dear.
That's why it's so cold outside. Blame Blaroni.
Thanks, Phil.
Blame Blaroni.
Why not?